Hi, welcome to the small shed on Saturday. Today I'm going to be doing a bit of casting. Now you may remember a couple of weeks ago, if you saw it, I did some work milling out some resin parts that had been cast from a 3D print that wasn't quite up to scratch, and I've replaced all the brickwork detail on it with some plastic sheeting. This week, as a follow-on, I was then asked to do another 20 odd copies of it, so it was out with the silicone rubber and the moulds and the resin, and we've done a casting of the actual part that we routed the other week. And as I mentioned at the end of the last routering video, this is something that's relevant to all sorts of disciplines and all sorts of products. So it's not just model railway bits, it's anything you want casting in resin. It's showing you how to do it with a relatively simple mould. The first thing to do is to put some pieces of double-sided tape on the back of the item that was going to be cast. I'm only doing this as a one-piece mould. You can make two-part moulds, but they're a lot more complicated. But this is a fairly simple matter of just putting something down on a flat base, putting a box around it, and then you can pour the resin in. And when you pour the silicone rubber in, and when you strip the rubber away, you're left with a void that's the shape of the part that you want cast. It's fairly straightforward. It's the way things have been cast for years. It's just using slightly more modern materials. The base that it's stuck to is just a piece of perspex. And once the sides are secured, I just go around the joints with the hot melt gun just to tidy up the joint and make sure there's no silicone can escape. Then the mould is levelled to make sure that the finished block is level at the bottom. Otherwise, again, when you put it down on a surface, it won't be lying in a flat plane, and the resin will be then crooked on the mould itself when you pour it. The rubber is two-part mix. It's, I think, roughly speaking, 100 parts of rubber to about 3 of the hardener. It varies depending on the setting time you want, the temperature, that sort of thing, but I usually use about 3 or 4%, and it's then dry within 24 hours. Then once it's mixed, it's poured into the moulds, and I just usually poke around with a coffee stirrer or something like that just to make sure that it's into all of the voids, undercuts, corners, and then the air bubbles will start to slowly release up to the surface. And again, it won't matter if there are bubbles there because it's on the back of the casting. In this instance, I didn't know quite how much rubber I needed, so I started with what I thought was a reasonable amount, slightly under, and did one mix, and then I could gauge reasonably well how much I needed, and then did a second pour just to finish it off. And here we are 24 hours on with the silicone rubber moulding. It's now gone completely solid, You can see the idea there, that's the thing that's being cast in there. And it's simply then a matter of just breaking the sides back off the moulds. Can reuse the Perspex base. I've got a set of standard bases with Lego glued to them as a base so that I can make my own square moulds, but this was an odd size. Let me just crack the base off. Run underneath just a little bit, but it's not a major issue. Soon comes off with a sharp knife. What I've got to be careful of is that there's a slight undercut around the window opening. Right, we'll clean the moulds out. And the last bits and pieces out of there. And we've got 100 ml of hardener. Sorry, 50 ml of hardener, 50 ml of resin. It should be by weight, but I haven't got any scales at the moment, so we'll just do it by volume. It's close enough. Make sure it's thoroughly mixed together. And just pour it into the moulds. Just move it around just to make sure there's no air bubbles trapped in the delicate bits. They'll float up to the surface, which of course will be on the back, so that won't matter then. The same in these, just to and it's just a matter of waiting a couple of minutes for it to dry. You can start to see that within a couple of minutes it starts to change. Looks almost like a fungus growing that, as it actually starts to turn. At this stage it's still pliable, it's more like a jelly than a solid state. It probably needs about another half an hour until it is easy to strip the mould. And you can see that the stuff on the surface hasn't actually set yet. It's the heat generated by the larger mass setting that forces itself to react even quicker, and that the bits that are quite thin on the edges, they will take longer to go. And again you can see them starting to turn from where the heat is. It starts to move outwards across the other bits of resin. I'll leave those now for about half an hour and we'll see what they look like. once the resin's had half an hour or so to go off, it's got quite hard. There's still a little bit of flex in it, but there's enough to be able to strip the mould. All you need to do is just peel the edges away, and then you can pop the centre part out. It's a little bit difficult because there's an undercut on the middle, but it just goes out like that, and then that just comes out, and you've got the finished article. And now there's just another 22 to go. And that's the new finished castings against the old ones. You can see there's a lot better definition on the brickwork. Given that this is going to be 6 or 7 feet away from anybody that can see it, it's not that critical, but it's best to get it right in the first place. I hope that was of interest, and if it was, please press like, subscribe and share it with your friends, and I look forward to seeing you next Saturday when we'll have something hopefully equally interesting. Bye.